Hey everybody, welcome to Leon's Chainsaw Parts and Repair. We're looking at Mark's EZ here. And this thing's got all kinds of... There's no bad problems, but at least not that I know of. Got good compression and all that, but he was running into some ignition problems, couldn't get spark. And he had bought a replacement condenser, and it came in not looking the way it should, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And then he also picked up a spare coil, I think from eBay. Doesn't matter where it came from. But we'll go through everything that's going on here. And yeah, we'll sort this out. So, right off the bat, got all kinds of fun stuff going on. So this one, I think, God, that was the eBay coil. Anyway, we've got a Felon ignition system, so we got to keep all those parts straight. Now, to confuse matters a little bit, this is a Felon coil, but you can see the coil wire, or the spark plug wire, says Presto Light. To the best of my knowledge, all of the wires that HomeLight sold, because these just unscrew, if you bought one, it was going to say Presto Light. So you've got to kind of know the shape of the coil, the colors, the shape of this lamination. This is Felon. Wait, hold on. Yeah, it is, because it's got the X number on there. Dad. Actually, yeah, they're the same thing. That one's got an FW. But again, I believe it was Felon that used an X designation. Anyway, even when you know what the heck you're doing, this stuff can get confusing. To make it worse, there were two different versions of the Felon system that were used on these early saws. Now note that this is an EZ. This is an EZ automatic. It isn't a super EZ automatic. That's important. Again, we've talked about how there's different CCs. This one's a 35cc. And this is one of those, I'm going to say rare, because you just don't see very many of them. It's a very uncommon red EZ. Most of these were blue. And by the time you got to this color scheme, typically it was an EZ automatic. But there was at least a year that they were sold like this. So the early Felon systems were commonly found on these EZs. Now the early system had a slightly different points box than this. And the wire comes out the back end here and wraps around. And I think you were supposed to route it kind of like that. Yeah. And you see that still exposes that wire to a nice kink, sharp edge, potential getting pinched down in as you install it. So the later ones used that style wire, that style condenser, with the wire coming out the front and you just route it through and done. Now this is the one that was in there, and this is what Mark suspected was bad, and I agree with him. There's two things. It's taken it, actually three. It's taken an impact. You can see that little divot there. The end, to me, looks a bit swollen. Now, that's not 100%. But if you've got other things that are leading you to think a condenser's bad, and you see the end is swollen a little bit, could well be. But then, you can tell that the wire has been pinched. You can actually see through the insulation and see bare wire there. Any one of those things could have been the issue there. Whatever, we're not using it. Now, the note in the box said, hey, I've got a solid state setup I want you to use. It's one of these conversion modules. And it does look pretty new. Pretty darn new. So we're going to use that. I need to grab, thought I grabbed everything. I need to grab a terminal. And we'll do this the right way. So most of these modules come with a they come with a little piece of sheet metal as a mounting plate. Now that didn't come with this, so we're going to do it a little different. And what we're going to end up doing is zip tying it in place. Now that's not as hokey as it sounds, because the alternative is actually drilling a hole in the case here and screwing it down. And if you ever want to go back to stock for any reason, then you've got a hole drilled there. All these things need is to integrate into where the points would have hooked up. Get off of there. I didn't want you to do that. That's where you hook up the positive side of your module. And then you need to ground it out. I was test fitting this terminal and it decided to stay there. So that's it. You got a plus and minus side to the module. But to do this right, what we're going to do, I want to leave the points box in here. We're going to take the points out because they're pretty well shot. We're going to line this back up where it belongs, and we're going to screw that back into place. And the reason we're going to do that, you can see this felt washer that's down there. That acts as a protector for the crankshaft seal. And if, God forbid, it starts leaking, and it's not leaking bad enough for you to notice it in the way the saw is running, it won't draw dirt through there if you've got that felt in place, or at least it's a hell of a lot less likely. The felt also acts as a protector to keep contaminants from hitting the crankshaft seal quite so soon. So let's see if I've got that series. That's not... Craziness. That's the screw that I want. The longer ones for the condenser, which we obviously are not going to use. So what we're going to do is just get this box secured down like normal. We're going to put the cover on it and walk away. And we will put the felt back on there as well. Okay, so that's eliminated. Now to do this right, in my opinion, we need to take the coil we're going to use loose. Now I've already tested this coil to make sure it's good, and it is. So we're going to leave it on the saw. We won't need that spare coil from eBay. We could, in principle, leave the coil in place, fish this wire back through to where it was, or work with it right here, cut this terminal off and crimp a new one on. I don't want to do that. I want to save that wire. Just because. Pure principle. Plus we already have this. So that was existing. I don't like it. We're going to get rid of it. This is how it's going to come to you in most cases. Sometimes it doesn't even have like this oddball bullet terminal. It'll just be two leads that are so long. Now with where we're going to mount this, we don't need all this extra lead here, so we're going to get rid of a little bit of it. Those nippers aren't worth a diddly squat. Yeah, this module doesn't even have the plus and minus on it, so it must not matter. On this one, most of them have it marked out. So again, this is where it's going to connect, where the old points, the old lead coming from the points would be. So we're going to put the spade terminal on there. I'm going to plug that in. Somebody's really reefed on that at some point. Make sure your terminal isn't bent to the point where it's touching the back of the coil there, the lamination. See, even that is way more than what we need, but in theory, if the saw was to ever die, I could pull it off and use it somewhere else. So let's loosely remount our coil now. We don't want to go tight, because we have to gap this to the flywheel when we get that back on. Some guys have zero luck with these modules. Most people, they go indefinitely and have no trouble at all. So, I don't know. I don't know if the ones that tend to fail are just defective, if they're getting too hot. I don't know. I know when I mount one, I like to give it plenty of airflow. I tend to lean towards the too hot theory as to why they would fail. So having them close to the flywheel, I mean, you gotta have them reasonably close, because the magnetic field on the flywheel is what's triggering this. What does surprise me is I've had no change in their performance, whether it's mounted up here, down here. For whatever reason, where the module sits doesn't seem to affect the timing. So it's that sensitive that it'll work properly. So the timing is still controlled by when the magnet passes one of these legs of the coil. Alright, so we need to ground this. So we're going to cut that bullet off. I didn't like the way that was done before. And we're going to put the ring terminal on. And then we will ground it to the existing coil ground that's already here. You've got to be kidding me. I don't know where that... there it is. I tell you, dropping stuff in this shop is dangerous. You may find a box full of sawdust and whatever else, and not find your piece you dropped. I got lucky this time. So anyway, we're going to ground this out where it's already an existing ground point. Which is right there. And that screw is actually kind of loose. Alright, we're almost there. Find one of my small zip ties here. That'll work. We're going to corral some of that extra lead if we can. But first, let's fish it through where we want it to be, which is naturally easier said than done. These saws are tight. There's not a lot of extra space under here. And that's why I like this particular method that I'm going to use better. Because it still keeps it up where it needs to be and out of the way. allows you to use it. So kind of route everything down. Oop, oh, don't come out. Got to get it down. I think that just, I've done this before, that should just barely clear. We'll find out. I'd say the only alternative to this style is to screw it into the case itself. And if you're certain you're never going to want to go back to points, you go right ahead and do that. Alright. Sits flat. We're golden. And none of that can rattle around and move. So let's put the flywheel back on and we'll give it the spark test. I haven't gone through any other part of the saw since ignition was the piece that was called out. That's where I started. Fuel hose looks good here, but as to whether the carburetor needs a kit or not, I don't think Mark and I ever discussed that, and the note in the box doesn't indicate whether he touched it or not. And I would like flywheel to quit fighting with me and just line up. There it goes. Sometimes you can do it by braille. Sometimes you gotta look at that keyway and it'll magically drop. Alright, now we can gap the flywheel. Oh, shoot. Well, that's going to be difficult. I should have done that before zip tying that damn module down. One screw is going to be a little hard to get to. Let's see if I can sneak back. I don't think so. Damn. That was a miscue. Wait. Oh. I might just luck out here. So note on procedure order. Gap it first. That is one place where mounting it down here would make things a little easier. Okay. Do we have spark? We damn well better. There we go. Right. So that problem's solved. Put all that stuff together. Alright, look at that. Famous case of a missing air filter grommet. Well, unfortunately that air, or that silicone has fused in there so well, one of my aftermarket grommets isn't a good candidate for that, so we're not going to bother trying. I don't know if that carb's been off or not. I think I'm going to assemble some stuff. And if looks like a test run is feasible, we'll come back to it. Okay, no big surprise. There's going to be some carburation issues here. I started to fill it with fuel and of course checked the gas and oil caps, and their duckbill valves were shot. So those are fixed, but took too many pulls to get it started. And when I did, it was doing something it's not unheard of. We've either... Yeah, well, let me show you. Let me get this camera adjusted. Let's see if I can zoom in. There. I'll try try not to move this as I start it. Watch what's happening back here. You see that? I pulled the trigger and we got a huge pulse out the back of the carburetor and it just blasted fuel in here. And look at all that fuel that's running out. Now it's not because, get back to normal there. It's not because these screws are open too far. That low is only open half a turn. The high was open 3/4. That's not normal. That much fuel back there. Either we have a stiff diaphragm that's allowing this thing to just flood to beat hell, or the fuel inlet arm is all out of whack, or something like that. I don't know. It's hard to say, but let's find out. Just kind of wanted you guys to see what she was doing there. And let you know that's definitely not normal. You shouldn't be seeing that. Anytime you get that much fuel puddling outside of in the carb chamber here, that's not right. So this might have a custom choke retainer. Fix that down the road. Alright, as usual, I can complain about how there's no room to get your hands into this thing. Because there isn't. Pretty tight in this carb chamber. Alright, that side's loose. This side I like to flip the choke to half, and that usually, yeah, just get in there, just barely. Oh. Okay, look at all that gas that's puddled in there. That's not normal. She should not be doing that. You can't see all the reed valves. Looking at it like this, you can see 3 of the 4. What I have found is a bad reed valve rears its ugly head most with a lack of idle. Then at throttle, you can usually throttle them up, but it's blowing a bunch of spit back out. I'm willing to bet our problem is not reeds. I'm going to guess it's on this side of the carburetor. Before I loosen that anymore, see how close the diaphragm is to that cover? I'm going to guess this fuel inlet arm is pretty high. It's a pretty common thing I see happen on these, because it's easy to look at one of those, move it with your finger and go, God, that's not moving that needle hardly at all. There's no way that's going to be flowing enough fuel. And then it gets bent up. And if you don't assemble it with pressure, under pressure, oh, look at that. Way too high. And that's moving that an incredible amount. We're already in here. We're going to inspect the circuit plate gasket. I've only got one fuel inlet here, so we're going to want to see a Z-shaped gasket behind here. And that's there. So that's good. This carb has had a kit. That needle's not even that bad. A little bit of junk. That tank had a lot of corrosion damage in it. I had to blow that junk out. Everything else doesn't look like that check valve screen has been out recently. You gonna cooperate, or you gonna be a pain in my ass? I'm not sure why I asked that question. I already knew what the damn answer was gonna be. Remember, with these, if you're careful, you just put this thing back together the way it came apart. If you find you don't need a check valve. So be careful pulling your screen, your retainer clip. And this can be a little bit of a challenge to get that screen to come out. Oh, I tipped it there. There we go. Alright. Now there's a good sign. This one's already been replaced. See how this is a tan colored material? That's the good stuff. That's not the old black stuff, so we're set there. And this is where being careful taking that screen out pays off, as you just put it right back in and you call it good. That's a small step to take when you've already got the carb apart. It's worth it. If you don't know the history of the carb, it's worth checking that. Because a bad check valve can cause tuning issues. They're frustrating to beat hell and will make you think all kinds of things are wrong with your carburetor, and it's led to guys to replace it when they don't need to. I'm going to go air hose this real quick. Alright. I'm going to take the opportunity of having this apart to adjust this arm slightly. You want to be careful. You can adjust these too much, too many times. And see how that's a captured arm? When that breaks, you're effed. Then you're looking for a new circuit plate. That, I can tell you, is one of the more common requests I get. And it's been years since I've had one of those in stock. Alright, I'm going to do my spring stretch that I love to do. Again, somewhere there's a carb purist that's going, you idiot, just go find a different rate spring. And yeah, that probably would be the right way, the most technically correct way, but this works. It works just fine. You little springy bastard. Come on. I think after this I'm going to get another cup of coffee. Alright, did I set you down straight enough? No, of course I didn't. I think we can work with that though. There we go. Tell you, the first couple times you take one of these apart, you'll probably be frustrated beyond all belief trying to get this all to go back together properly. But after a while, it just kind of comes together. Alright, now I probably adjusted that a little too low. In fact, I'm certain I did based on what I see there. It's a lot easier to bring it up. Yeah, see, that's not moving next to nothing. But Still pull it off the seat a little bit. So what we're going to do is just a little bit of, ooh, that might be it right there. Yep, I see the needle moving. I'm going to call that good. Now I want to assemble this under pressure to test it, but let's inspect this other side first, because you got to have that assembled to do that. Got to make sure that screen isn't all jacked up, full of debris. The fuel filter looked like it was in decent shape, actually good shape. But here's why we took it apart. Where's the screen? It ain't there. And that's not okay. That is not okay at all. The rest of this looks good though. So let's go to the magic carburetor bin. See if I've got a screen laying at the bottom. Bingo. Now, can I get it out of here without bending it? There we go. Tell you, when I don't, on these curbs that I work on all the time, when I don't use every piece, they don't go in the garbage, they go in that bin. So in a case like this, where all I need is a dang screen, I don't have to rip open a new kit. And the customer doesn't have to pay for a new kit. Now if I worked on every saw under the sun all the time, that wouldn't be as practical. But since I'm a home light guy, it's a little bit more so. Alright, let's put this back together. Put some pressure to it. My guess is this thing's going to run a whole lot better when we get it back in there. Adapter hose and our little setup here. We'll see how bad that gasket on the other side leaks. Well, that's surprising. It doesn't. Alright. This is a good kit. The diaphragm has the right size nub there, which is next to none. Oop. Let's see if we can set this bad boy down and not have that needle just drop. Alright, fine, piss me off. See if I care. This thing's a little distorted. Look at that. You can't tell for certain until you get all the screws tightened down, but usually if you put your thumb right in the middle there and give it a good hard clamp, if you've got something too high, you're going to know about it right then and there. We've lost next to nothing, so I feel pretty good that this carb is going to be good to go. But even though this is only going to take 15 minutes or so round trip on this carb, that's why we went ahead and checked that check valve while we were in there. Otherwise, you get it back together, you got tunability issues, it's not going right. Then you're pulling the whole thing out again, and it's 15 minutes more that you've wasted. And I suppose if we all had nothing better to do, that'd be alright. Something tells me that's not the case for too many of us. Alright. Oh, you gotta be shitting me. Ha! Most of the time the gasket either sticks to the carburetor or to the intake manifold. There was no carb gasket in there. Alrighty. There ain't no carb gasket. That I don't see quite as often. That's interesting. That would explain the few extra pulls it took to actually get it to try and fire in the first place. Alright. So carb gaskets on these damn things are a pain in the ass. I'll show you why. Get the screws started in their grommets here. Alright. So the angle that this all slopes back, those screws don't stay in place. So, you gotta get one side lined up through the carb gasket hole, and I can't show you guys this in good detail. Too dark, plus I wouldn't be able to see what the hell it was I was doing, and I'm not even sure I'm right here. But you're going to end up starting one side at a time. I mean, you could high tack these and then kind of glue it to the carburetor, and that'd probably work. If this one annoys me too much, I'll pull it back out and do just that. Oop, there. I think I heard threads. Come on, you. Yeah. Caught him. Ooh. Now you saw how that dropped. I think it fell right into place. Nope. Oh, yes, it did. Okay, so I got lucky there. When the gasket dropped, it fell and it stayed where it needed to. Otherwise, you're going to use a pointed tool like this and just carefully lift it until you can push the screw through and see it start into the intake manifold. I've had these things be a much bigger pain in the butt than that. So I will take my stroke of dumb luck today. And hopefully there's a few more down the line, because there's more boxes to open. Some of you guys that have contacted me about doing a saw repair have gotten my response that, hey, I'm deferring any new work until late September. And that's just because it was so backed up in here. And there's, yeah, I need to get, I've got the 3 saws, that, the most current videos, that 925, that John Deere CS71, and then Randy's Super XL sitting out there in the sun, airing out to be boxed up. So that's a good start, but I've still got a couple of Kent saws back there, a couple of Howell saws. I think Howell's are done completely. So just need to get those back to him. But Kent's, that Eager Beaver 3.4 had the three screws that go into the oil tank for the starter were just snapped off. And the screws are so much harder than the metal around them, the drill, I could not keep a drill centered on those. It just would not work. Maybe with a drill press it would have, maybe, but I've even had those walk. So, but anyway, there's still plenty of stuff to come here. Alright, let's see if this will run any better. I'm going to reset this carb to what I know is a little better. So that's about 1 I'll go to full 1.5. This should be okay on the high speed side. At least enough to get it running to where it'll tune. Well, maybe I was wrong about those reed valves. I'll be damned. Or maybe that intake manifold is cracked. Oh, once again, you balance how far you go into a saw versus how likely something is to be bad. That's still doing the exact same thing. And that doesn't make me too happy. That doesn't make me too happy at all. It's not that common to have reed valve problems. They do break. I mean, you work on these long enough and you'll see it. But it's a handful of saws. Really low percentage. At least in my experience it is. So the good news, and I say that jokingly, is that now we'll have another chance for this carburetor gasket to be a pain in the butt. God. Alright, well, we're going to take them out. So, if you're good and these cooperate, you don't have to take the throttle handle off. If you get a round shank screwdriver, the hardest one to reach is that one right there. And if you can get it to start, you're usually good. But you've got to be careful not to strip that slot out or you're done. The screw's got a hex to it, but there's no way you're going to get a socket on any one of these with the throttle handle installed. So you want to be damn careful, make sure your screwdriver's in good shape, and give it plenty of back pressure here as you're breaking them loose. Now those weren't as tight as I normally encounter, so we'll see what we find here. I still don't think there's anything wrong. No cracks. I don't see any cracks in that intake manifold. Alright, let's see if we can get these reed valves out without making a mess. Oh. You have to be shitting me. It would absolutely figure. Ha! Remember how I said if there was a problem it would have to be the top one? I don't know how it would even run at idle. It wasn't running good. But one reed valve is completely missing. Should have stuck with my instinct. That was a lot of fuel coming out of there. Should have pulled that the first time around. So where did that go? I haven't got the foggiest clue. I don't even know how long ago it would have been that this thing would have been apart. If it was down in the crankcase, we'd already know about it. It would have already chewed it up. So, I don't know. That one's a mystery to me. So, I'm going to go get another, hopefully I've got some reeds in stock. The other three are probably fine. I'll probably flip. If these are flat, yeah. So see how the pins that hold those are, you know, they're symmetrical. They're not offset. You can flip these reeds. So like this one, that's just a little bit out away from the block, I'll flip it so at the top seat's there, and that'll pull it in. They'll sit a lot more flush. Flipping reeds is a pretty easy way to, if they're too exaggerated, you want to replace them, but if it's just a little bit like that, sometimes you can eliminate one pull of cold start because you're just getting a better pulse to the carburetor. But anyway, I'm going to see if I've got any of those. Alright, I don't know what's scarier, the fact I had plenty of these in stock or that I remembered the part number without having to look it up. I've wasted a lot of brain cells. So let's flip these. If there's anything that looks like sawdust in here, it's going to get cleaned out. Now this gets tricky, keeping these in place. If they start falling over on you and you start getting pissed, a little drop of oil will hold them in. I'm just going to flip the 3 that we're reusing on principle. They've probably been the way they are for 50 years, 60 years. See how that one fell over on me? Now you want to line the hole in this cage up with the hole on the retainer, because that is your pulse hole for the carburetor. Once you get it down there, it holds everything in place. Perfect. And reassembly is just the exact opposite. Now I'm going to wipe in here, get any loose sawdust that's now combined with gasoline out of there. Okay. Just going to start all these before we try and tighten them down. If I can get that to start. Being a pain in my butt. So if you were working on this and as you took your reed cage out the way we just did, if you knew one dropped at that point, you get it out of there. In this case, I don't know how or when it went. The fact that I've already run the saw a little bit, I say, if it was loose and down in the engine, we'd already know about it. And I honestly, as scary as this sounds, I think it would chew it up and spit it out pretty quick. Wouldn't do your piston any good, but I don't think it would actually seize it. Now, we're seeing that getting the screws back in is kind of a pain. There we go. And for this upper one, that's so hard to get to here. Well, make sure you put the one, if they're all the same, they're all the same, but if you got one that has a better slot, you put it up here so you got the best possible bite with your screwdriver. You certainly don't put the one with the dinged up slot up there. It's just asking for trouble. Now, as we were talking about, if you did accidentally have a reed drop in the engine, how the hell would you get it out? Well, don't turn the engine over. Leave it exactly where it is and look and see if you can see it. And if you can even remotely see it and you have a magnet of some sort, work it in there and snag it. They're steel. I don't think they're spring steel, I think they're tool steel, but you know what? It doesn't matter. They're steel. A magnet will grab it. Worst case scenario, you'd tear the engine apart to get it out. And that doesn't sound like much fun. So I would say do your best not to drop a reed. Really, what you want to try to do is make sure that retainer comes out with the plastic housing. And you can kind of watch that as it comes out. Now, it's a whole lot easier without this in place. So I guess that's one of the trade-off risks that you have. You leave the throttle handle in place, take it out like I did. Be aware that there's that risk that one of those could drop. I think I've had it happen once, and I was able to use the magnet and get it back out. But you can usually tell that black retainer is still stuck to the crankcase, and you can try and work it loose. But with any repair, there's always the risk of complications. Alright. I'd like to think this is the final time that we're going to put this carburetor on. Again, this will end up being a longer video than what I had intended for starting out, but this is again another one of those real life. This is the kind of stuff that happens. So whether you're making the repair yourself, if that's the case, then you can understand some of the complications that can arise. And if you've taken it to a shop and they tell you it took, 2 hours to do something that you think probably should have only taken 1 hour, it doesn't automatically mean they're trying to clip you. It may be that they ran into crap like this. But that's where, honestly, that's part of why so many of these things hit my bench, because not too many of your shops that are local to you are going to take these anymore. And I've been very critical of that, but my friend TJ has worked at small engine shops off and on since he was 15 or 16, and most of those shops kind of had the same policy. If it was very far out of the mainstream of what they deal with, what they currently sell. So if they're a steel dealer, they're not going to spend a whole lot of time repairing an old home light. And they're going to likely tell you parts aren't available because they're not available through their distributor. And, I was talking to TJ about this one day, and he's like, I get where you're coming from. He said, but, if we can stay too busy, with a backlog of just repairing our current customers, stuff, what real incentive is there to spend an hour on the internet tracking down a bunch of parts for an old saw? We're billing out at $70 an hour. It's like, there's no way the customer is going to be willing to pay that, to repair a saw, for $200 or $300 when they can pull a brand new one off the shelf at that cost. And that made sense. I totally get that. And that is one of the reasons why I try to keep the labor rates for this stuff down where I do, to make it a little more attractive to keep an older saw running. Well, what do you think, folks? Is the third try the charm? I hope so. I know it has to run better with all 4 reed valves. Ha! Yeah. Tell you, these HDCs can be touchy little bastards. I was going just needle width turns, or blade width turns there to get that low speed dialed in. So that was a lot longer than I anticipated, intended, whatever. That's okay. You guys got some real world stuff out of that, kind of what it's going to take on some of these. Few things I want to point out before we end this. This saw has been mudded together with parts. The only way you would really know for absolute certain what it is, well, there's a number of ways. That throttle handle cover doesn't belong on this saw. The EZ never had a rubber grip like that, so I know that's not original. EZ never had a rubber padded handlebar up here, and you can tell that's not original because there's been some modifications done to get it to bolt up. Same thing down there. You can see things didn't line up right. Handlebars are not interchangeable between the supers and the non-supers. So what is it? Well, the fact that they had to mod this and that. It is an EZ, but here's the number one way. There's no automatic oil pump back there. It's manual oiler only. And that is some dirty, nasty looking oil. I'm sure glad I just shot all that all over the bench. But that tells you just how much pressure one of those little oil pumps will put out. So you can effectively oil a 16-inch bar, no problem with one of these. I see some guy, you know, I'm not going to get a whole spiel going on manual oilers, but you don't need to be in a cut just blam, blam, blam. I mean, seriously, I like when I'm using a saw that's a manual oiler, and I don't do that much, but when it's a manual oiler only, depending on the size of the cut, I'm going to get the chain speed up, and just before I get into the wood, I'll give it a good pump. If you're in a long cut, you know, 1 or 2 as you're going through, cool. Just keep an eye on your chain. If it looks wet, you've got enough oil on there. If it's not accumulating sawdust. If you see buildup of sawdust and pitch and stuff on there, you're not getting enough oil to it. That's the easiest way I know. But anyway, this isn't easy because there's no oil pump back there. But this clutch is much newer. This is a newer Super Easy style, which is fine. That's cool. There's no problem with upgrading to the newest style clutch. That drum is pretty shot, so I'm going to see what I've got in stock, if anything, and you know, worst case, order one in and get that replaced. So yeah, I think I will give this the customary 2-3 day sit time. Now that I think I have it tuned, fire it up cold. Yeah, it warmed up. And then see how it acts. I have a feeling it's going to be just a little bit too lean when I go to fire it up the next time. But we'll see. So yeah, Mark, we're close.